Hello, everyone, and welcome to No Man's Podcast, where we talk about the infamous 1990s Batman story, No Man's Land. My name is Vincent, and I'm joined by
Michael.
Mike.
And today we are talking about 3 issues of Robin number 71, 72, and 73. And we are in the home stretch. This first issue, and they're all written by Chuck Dixon, longtime Robin writer. This first issue is drawn by Staz Johnson, who I believe has been the ongoing artist for this series, and has drawn most of the Robin issues while we've been reading them in and out for No Man's Land. And this is ostensibly, at least initially, it's a Killer Croc story, and then it kind of transitions into something totally different. But it's a Killer Croc story. Our episode is called The Lizard King because it's a funny title. But on the cover of this first issue, it has the tagline, "Tastes like chicken," with Killer Croc kind of munching on some tattered costume. And we open with him getting fitted for a suit. And let me show you more of my face. He's getting fitted for a suit, which I think is a funny visual. And he doesn't want to go back to the sewers. And he says that he was pushed there by Black Mask and the cops and other people. And I'm not sure that that's specifically referencing something. I don't remember quite the specifics of when we last saw him. I think he was already in the sewers. So it may have been an immediate previous arc, or, I mean, this could be referring to something like way back and just his general like long-term status quo, because I do know that Croc was introduced like maybe late 70s or early 80s in the Jerry Conway run, and then Black Mask is introduced in the next run, but those are pre-Crisis, and I don't know that either of them showed up enough to necessarily interact with each other. But if that is the case, that would be interesting. If they're referring to kind of pseudo-canon pre-Crisis stuff. I don't think that's the case, though. And Croc, I guess, I mean, he's had his territory during No Man's Land once things settled and all the villains kind of had their little area. But for whatever reason, right now, he's got a little bit of mojo, and he's going to push for more turf. And one of his major strategies, which we see outlined here, is that he seems to have a ton of rope or something, or he just likes using it because he's constantly hanging people. And then he also uses rope to have his underlings haul him on top of a non-functional car. But the thing is, and I thought this was going to come back around, he's like a total asshole. He's quite authoritarian, which is opposite to how we've actually seen a lot of these villains. Granted, some of the villains that we focused on, they do more of a cult of personality thing rather than a rule by a fist. So obviously Poison Ivy, she had her own like kind of ruling gimmick. Penguin is kind of in that gray area as well. Two-Face as well. Even back when we saw the kind of new version of Black Mask, he had like that cult factor. And even the Joker, I mean, it's all chaotic and everything, but he has his followers. With Croc, it kind of seems like, hey, you're near me, I'm powerful, so get in line. And I was expecting that kind of authoritarianism to maybe actually factor into the plot, because it stood out to me. It's pretty comical. So I was expecting like a twist where it's like, you know, one of Croc's underlings would turn sides or they'd rise against him and things like that. And we've seen a tiny bit of that in previous arcs, but that doesn't factor in. And Robin doesn't want to go back in the sewers either, because the last major arc that we saw him in, or maybe 2 arcs ago, he was also in the sewers. Before we really jumped into No Man's Land, I joked that Tim Drake is constantly in the sewers in his book, which I think is funny, especially before you read a bunch of it and know the specifics. And he's getting patched up by Alfred, and he really wants to call his dad, because he's kind of just in Gotham in this No Man's Land, and yeah, I mean, his normal status quo before this crossover was that he was living with his dad and doing some Robin stuff discreetly on the side. He's no longer living with Bruce, but he can't call his dad and reveal anything, reveal much of anything, because obviously that gives away the Bat family, and it's just really complicated. And it's funny because from his dad's perspective, he just sees Tim as constantly running away when he's doing Robin stuff, but somehow he just trusts him to a certain extent that he knows it isn't drugs or gangs or really anything that problematic. He just thinks something's up with him and it's probably between us. And Tim has a little Skype call with Dick and Babs, who we saw in previous arcs, and then gets an email from Stephanie Brown, aka Spoiler, which I thought was funny. It's not really clear in the lettering, but there's like some highlighting around his head in the panel where when Tim is like, yeah, Steph just emailed me. It seems in the art like Alfred is like, what the fuck? But it's like, no, it's a secure server set up just for her. Like she has no idea who she's like where she's emailing and stuff. I thought that was funny because Steph's not like fully a member of the Bat family, and I guess she doesn't become one basically until she becomes a Robin. And then Robin goes out scouting, comes across Croc, and he gets caught. And this issue ends with him tied to a car as Croc's gang rolls up on an alliance of Penguin and the Blue Boys. He's invading initially Penguin's territory, but Penguin called up the cops because they have their uneasy alliance, like all alliances, and they're going to hold together against Croc. And the funniest part of this whole issue is that between the entire rest of the issue and this final page, Killer Croc has changed suits. He was wearing like a white pinstripe thing, and now he has like a navy suit. And it's not just coloring thing. It's a different design. So I see two things. Either Staz Johnson like did the last page later, or just forgot or didn't care and drew a different suit. And then they're like, it's obviously a different suit. So the colorist had to account for that. And they didn't feel like fixing it or didn't have time. Or it's just, there's absolutely no particular explanation to it. And they literally just changed suits because there could be a passage of time, like a day cycle between this last page and the rest of the arc. Or he just decides change suits after there's a tiny scuffle. And either way, I think it's funny, either from a creative standpoint or in story, that Croc is suddenly into suits. And that's how Robin 71 ends, which takes us right into the next issue. Do you guys want to talk a tiny bit about this first one or kind of do a sum up?
I'll do some tiny talks about it. I thought this is our last issue of Staz Johnson, and we like Staz Johnson. So sad to see him go, but I think pretty good art throughout this whole, I guess, mini arc we're going to call it tonight, because 71 and 72 are definitely arc. 73 it's more of a one-off, but it definitely connects to 71 and 72 as they all happen within like the span of 24 hours of each other. But I like the setting here with the establishing the secure server. I like that Steph's still in the book. It remains consistent with Dixon. I think I've been I don't know if the word's critical. I think I've definitely maintained my basis that Dixon's one of the better writers and knows the line more than anyone on this. So if you have a Dixon written issue, it's going to obviously be better than anything else we've been reading. But yeah, another good issue of Robin. I like the art showing that like the costume's kind of in pieces when he's back in whatever hideout he's at. He's not constantly in the costume. You see him like wearing the little booties here, and then and the mask is off. He's not fully in costume the whole time. I like that. And really good moments from Alfred. So Robin continues to be a strong book around.
Anything to add before I fully pass the baton?
Not really. Good issue. Dixon's voice for the whole Bat family is great. The Skype banter between Tim and Dick and Barbara was a fun little moment. So yeah, we're ready for
Yep.
issue 72 now. Continues directly from the end of 71. This one's called Last Stand on Grand Avenue, written by Chuck Dixon still. Pencils by Gordon Purcell, whose style is pretty similar to Stas Johnson, but if you go into it knowing it's two different artists, you can tell it's a little different.
Yeah, I almost.
So,
I just want to interject really quickly.
oh yeah,
We've definitely had at least one fill-in or assist on a Robin issue before, and I don't precisely remember if it was also Gordon Purcell or even possibly also and Stephen Harris. But last time, if I recall, our recollection was basically like, yeah, whoever the fill-in artist was, they fit naturally with Johnson, and it flowed well. And Mike already said this basically, and I'll voice it again that yeah, these three issues, there's three different artists, but it's not drastic or it doesn't pull you out of it.
oh yeah, definitely. This is definitely some of the more consistent, smooth fill-in art I've seen. This and whenever the other case we saw it earlier in Robin was. So they consistently did a good job with that in this book. So, Last Stand on Grand Avenue opens in the middle of this titular standoff. The Penguin and the Blue Boys are behind a barricade, a makeshift barricade, and Killer Croc's coming at them with his battering ram, which is not running automobile with Tim Drake tied to the front. He's awake by this point. He had been knocked out earlier, and he's interior monologuing about how much the situation sucks. Penguin's first instinct, being a villain, is to just shoot Croc, but Montoya and Bullock, who are there, are like convince him not to because Tim's a hostage. Thankfully, they have these little puke grenades, as they call them, which they throw at Killer Croc and his men. His goons get sick to their stomach and start puking, but they don't affect him. So Croc starts taking them on pretty much on his own, kind of bragging that he's on his own now, but later on we see that some of his goons are still fighting. While this fight goes on, Alfred sneaks up wearing a gas mask and unties Tim from the car, which is no longer being pulled. And Tim starts fighting the goons. Alfred helps out too, using a rifle, which Tim comments on, and he assures him that it's only got rubber bullets in it, not going to kill anyone. Bullock manages to fight Croc hand to hand and takes him down briefly. Montoya helps him out there, but he gets back up. Robin fights Croc, and he's monologuing in his mind about how he's not as strong as him, but he can outsmart him, and he does some kind of fancy maneuver with a rope where he ties him up inside the car, and he manages to get out, but then he just drops the car in his toe and yelps in pain, and then the fight's just over. I think the way he tied him in with the car had something to do with getting him to drop it on his foot. The mechanics of that trickery were a little unclear, but the fight's over. They win. We get this neat little moment where Bullock and Montoya, like, they thank him for saving their lives, and they, like, clearly admire his skill and bravery for someone so young. Like, they comment on, like, they weren't as tough as he is when they were his age. So then, later, Tim finally calls his dad, and he tells him the truth that he's in Gotham, but claims that he snuck in on a dare. His dad is quite mad at this, understandably, hangs up. Tim's just tuckered out, so he goes to sleep. Meanwhile, Tim's dad starts calling up a bunch of politicians, since apparently he's a big political donor, and if he makes enough angry phone calls, they'll do something, which I honestly didn't know much about Tim Drake or his family before getting into the story. Kind of surprises me that his dad has that much political clout, but I mean, I don't know. I guess. Anyway, We do the briefest of check-ins on Stephanie Brown and her mom, who briefly debate the vigilantism she's taken up. And then the issue ends. Batman wakes Robin up to show him that on every TV channel, there's his dad's managed to start a national media campaign to find his missing son and get him out of Gotham. So, yeah, overall, a good conclusion to this little story, good lead into the next story. Yeah, I thought this was a good issue. What'd you guys think of this one?
Yeah, I thought it was strong. It's kind of a little detour from the previous two issues, which are more of one arc, and this is kind of closing out the arc and ultimately closing out Robin for No Man's Land, which I'll get to a little bit more when we wrap up. I thought it was a very interesting dynamic to see Tim basically act like a ragdoll, act like he's, just a dumb kid with no capabilities or way to stand up for himself. So, because he's in civies and he's getting hauled out by these marshals. And then he also has to watch, Batgirl save the day. And it's not even really clear, like, what Batgirl, like, ultimately contributes here. I mean, it's implied, like, she did ultimately help him get successfully extracted. And then there's, like, this cool moment towards the end where the helicopter, like, drops her and then she's, like, able to break her fall. So, which is, like...
Wait. I think you skipped ahead an issue. I was talking about issue 72.
Oh, damn it. Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah. Okay, then 72.
I'm sorry. Yeah, this was the end of the Killer Croc story.
Yeah. I don't know. Then on that note, I don't have a ton to say about 72. My only major note, in addition to what you said, is that the way they kind of handle Alfred, I thought was interesting because he goes in to save the day. He's got the gas mask on, and he's carrying a gun. But then he makes like a offhand comment where he's like, "My acting career did not include action heroes," and I'm like, what about his whole Royal Navy career? And that that comes up to a whole thing where I'm not really certain on the then current status quo and backstory of Alfred, because I feel like all those kinds of pieces were added over the years, and I don't know what came in when. Like in the Golden Age, he was literally just like, here's a dumb butler. And then of course, very initially, he looked totally different. But, because I guess there's an Alfred TV show currently on air, which dives into some of these topics. And yeah, so that kind of caught me off guard, and I wasn't sure whether I should, call attention to that, or if that was just the status quo of the time.
Action was good. I like Gordon Purcell's art. I think the coloring was a little bit thing to point out here, as it was a lot more brighter and prominent colors were a lot more bolder. You had a lot of striking greens and reds here, especially on the costume. I think it worked really, really well. I don't know if this was digitally colored or traditionally colored, but it definitely like looks more prominent and better than some of the other issues we've read. It might have just been a higher quality scan for this collection of the book, but other than that, I don't have anything more different. I just think the action sequences and use of Alfred are still very, very good.
Okay. I jumped the gun a tiny bit, but I will let Mike fill in the gaps and close us out with 73.
Right. This is Robinson for The World Around the Corner. Dixon still on writing, and pencils is N. Stephen Harris. And I hate using the phrase right off the last issue. It's Batman and Robin looking at the computer of all the news broadcasts of them going after Tim and formulating the plan. So we have Jack Drake sitting with these federal marshals working out the plan there, and they're able to get the call to the cell phone to Tim, and Batman and Alfred are like kind of like motioning Tim on what to say because it's on clearly it's being broadcast on like a speakerphone, so everyone in the Batcave can hear it. And they're telling him, "Hey, you wear this, meet them here," and they're all setting up the plan. And kind of like it's not even like a really big goodbye. It's kind of, well, we have to expedite this fast because he's got to be out of there by 7 p.m. the next night. And Batgirl is assigned to basically be his bodyguard as he tries to make his escape out of there. We cut to these like thugs who I guess somehow we have like television and cable getting back into the city because we flex back to other times. There wasn't like any electricity or like word from the outside getting back into the city. We have that now. So I think that's a little bit of an odd occurrence that we just suddenly have televisions again, but because we haven't really started any sort of reclamation really. We had the Blue Boys kind of take a lot of territory back, but no sort of government help has been brought in yet. But the soldiers are going to go in, they're going to save Tim. And Batgirl and Robin are sitting on the rooftop waiting for the time. Robin changes into his little red jacket so the helicopter can spot him. And this gang attacks because, Tim's going to be a high priority thing that might be able to get money out of this, knowing that he's being broadcast everywhere. But it really kind of a static and boring action sequence of like the soldiers drop in with more ammo than they ever would need to. As they're just like laying down recovery fire so they can get Tim out of there onto the helicopter as Batgirl swings in and takes out some thugs. And then like jumps up on the rope and does like a really cool acrobatic dive off of it. And that's the end for Tim as he's whisked away back to Keystone City, probably to get grounded by his father. Good issue, but like it I wouldn't say better than the other two. It was just kind of, all right, well, that's it for Robin. So out of like the 6 series we're reading in this event, this one's done now.
Yeah, I pretty much already said what I said, but it's an interesting dynamic to see Tim kind of be undercover and act, incapable and not help, and defenseless essentially. And Batgirl was like there. I feel like this last few pages, like it tries to put over Batgirl, and there's like one kind of half-page splash panel where she's doing a ton of flips and you see the silhouettes and everything, but it's like she's just breaking her fall because the helicopter cut her rope, and it's like, that's not really a feat. She's just not killing herself. It was kind of weird. And also, I felt like that combined with the beginning of this arc, there's like a little bit of ambiguity around Batgirl's place in the Bat family, or at least how others are like acclimating to her, because obviously she is very new, and Robin is leaving now, so he hasn't had that much interaction with her yet. And Alfred, there's a thing where like Robin says Batgirl, and Alfred's like, the young lady, or vice versa, whoever says it first. And Robin's like, "Oh, you don't like Batgirl," or something like that. And he's like, "Would you like me to call you Bat Boy?" And like, I don't know if he's making fun of just the name Batgirl regardless, or if he's like similar to how Babs was initially, where he's like, "Yeah, I got to kind of get adjusted, to this new girl being Batgirl and taking Barbara's position and everything like that." It's a little hard for me to gauge what is trying to be written here, if anything. And that's really all I have to say.
Yeah, I'd say this issue is maybe a little weaker than the previous two. Kind of just ends the Tim Drake part of the story, but yeah, not bad though. This Robin stuff's all been enjoyable. So
Yeah, so that concludes this episode of Robin, the Lizard King. And that also concludes Robin in No Man's Land, both from the issues we will be reading and the character. And the final page, kind of like next issue caption, teases that No Man's Land is over in 1 week, which has to be in story time, because I know there's at least enough content that they definitely didn't stuff it over the next week or even 2 weeks, counting the one that this final issue came out. So only 1 week left in story, but we've got a couple episodes left. And as far as Robin goes, even though we're not going to be reading any of this, this is the point where Tim, and it's teased by his father and in the caption, he's enrolled in Brentwood Academy, which is like a prep school. And also, somewhat teased by the fact that we had 3 artists in these 3 issues. There's also a new art team coming in, and that's Pete Woods. And currently drawing Iron Man 2020 for Marvel as we're recording this. And eventually, Chuck Dixon's run will transition over to Tim Lewis, I forget his name, a writer who didn't do a ton else, but he jumps on around 100, and that's also around when the Brentwood Academy era ends. So that's where Robin goes next, and obviously DC's Tim Drake trades have stalled, and because Robin has 3 miniseries before his ongoing and a bunch of stuff to even before that to set up him as Robin and his status quo, even with 5 trades in, they're only like up to like issue 20 or 30. So, besides the crossovers, good luck reading some of this stuff. Besides digitally, that's always a great option. So we bid adieu to Robin. As Mike said repeatedly, it's been a consistent series. Chuck Dixon is great. Staz Johnson, I don't enjoy him quite as much as some of the very early artists on the Robin series. I mean, obviously there are little spots like Mike Wieringo drew it for a brief period, which is obviously a whole different thing. But he's good, very consistent, kind of house style-ish artist. But bye-bye Robin. And the next couple episodes, I was going to say next episode, but really the next couple episodes is kind of back to a little bit more ancillary stuff. Maybe wrapping up some threads, and then we will get to the actual conclusion. So thanks for watching this episode, and tune in next time. Bye-bye.